Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. We have with us today Ted Chaiban, Deputy Executive Director for Humanitarian Action and Supply Operations from UNICEF, along with Carl Skau, Deputy Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer for the World Food Program, who have just returned yesterday from a 3-day visit to Lebanon. And with that, I believe, Ted, you are going to begin for us.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks for coming today. I join you here today not just as a representative of UNICEF, but as a witness to the unfolding humanitarian catastrophe in Lebanon. Earlier this week, Carl Skau, who's online, and I met with families who've lost everything except hope in shelters that were overflowing with displaced families and in tented settlements hosting families with nowhere else to go. We listened to women and mothers in tears and fathers who spoke of nights filled with fear. Each story a testament to impossible decisions that parents are being forced to take to address and to respond to this terrible situation. We saw this also at Masna checkpoint, where hundreds of thousands of people have crossed into Syria since September 23rd, a movement which is quite significant in scale and complicates an already fraught situation in Syria itself. This is an example of people fleeing one devastation only to go into an uncertain future. They literally did not know what to expect as they were crossing the border. In Lebanon, approximately 1.2 million people, men, women, and children, have been displaced by this war, and that includes approximately 400,000 children. Nearly 190,000 of those have been forced from their homes into makeshift shelters and are hoping for a semblance of safety there. Mostly those are public schools, while countless others seek refuge with anyone who can offer a roof and a place to rest. In some cases, we saw people on the beach, in the beachfront of Beirut. And this has taken a huge toll on children in particular, who now grapple with nightmares of bombardments, loss of loved ones, and the erasure of their homes and schools. I want to recall in particular Zainab, who I met at a shelter in the Verdun part of Beirut. She told me with determination as she drew pictures of her now destroyed home that her main wish is to be able to go back there. She and her family escaped from the house as the bombs fell, and she knows she's lucky to be alive and safe. Yet, even in this darkness, we also witness profound acts of solidarity. As you know, Lebanon has had many fault lines, and it's been quite special at this time to see Lebanese communities band together across communal, sectarian, and religious lines. This is a solidarity that is helping people at this stage, and it's important that in our response, we respond to that solidarity so that whatever we do in response, it's not just for the displaced, but for host communities as well. But it's also the case that that solidarity will become stretched pretty quickly. It's one thing to host people, bring people in for a few weeks. It's another thing to go beyond those few weeks. UNICEF and the World Food Program are working tirelessly to meet immediate needs. Carl will speak about what WFP is doing. From the UNICEF end, we're working around the clock to meet children's needs. This includes work from ensuring the flow of water to supplying shelters with sanitation kits, soap, and shampoo, from linking where the displaced are now to different primary health care centers, to responding to the mental health needs of children through play activities, through psychosocial support activities, putting them in touch with counselors to discuss what they're going through, from tracing families to reunite lost children with their families, to delivering medical supplies, 167 tons to date, to help pregnant women and injured children get the care they need. And WFP and UNICEF have organized convoys to areas of the south, to Marja'yun yesterday, Sur earlier, so to different parts of the south. But the crisis requires much more to be done. And we're facing a number of inflection points. First inflection point is that the response so far, and I have to say there was a measure of preparedness, but the response so far has focused significantly on the shelters, which is understandable because a lot of the most vulnerable have gone to shelters. But we also need to support displaced families living with families or friends or renting a small place. As an example, we met two families, two brothers with about 10 family members who, are living with a colleague. A colleague of theirs from Mount Lebanon gave them 2 of her 3 rooms, and they're living there. But they're running out of money. I mean, they were working when they're in the south. They've been basically almost a month now displaced. They say, we got maybe 3-4 more weeks of cash on hand, and then we don't know what we'll do. So we need to be able to reach those types of displaced. And we're working with WFP, HCR, the World Bank to look at cash solutions in this case. Second, we need to upgrade the wash infrastructure in the 1,000 shelters. So imagine 1,000 people, the school in Verdun I referred to, with 12 toilets. 1,000 people, 12 toilets. I mean, these schools were not designed for hosting people 24 hours a day. So from the UNICEF side, we're committing to cover 300 of these shelters. Then winter's coming. It's getting cold here. It's going to get cold in Beirut very quickly. So the whole issue of supporting families as it gets cold. The fourth inflection point I want to speak about is that the school year has started in Beirut for private schools, but the public schools are either inaccessible, largely destroyed, or used as shelters. There's about 15% of the public schools that can be used, but the vast majority of them cannot now accommodate students. So we need to find a way to work on the issue of education to avoid losing a generation. And then last inflection point is the whole issue of the importance of international humanitarian law and really making the case that this is not an abstract concept. It's essential. All parties in this conflict need to prioritize the protection of civilian and civilian infrastructure. Strikes on homes, health centers, schools, and shelters are resulting in massive civilian casualties. Since this escalation in the war on the 23rd of September, 100 children have been killed and over 800 wounded. So it's imperative that all parties to the conflict adhere to IHL and comply with the principles of proportionality, distinction, and precaution in the conduct of hostilities. They need to respect medical personnel. You know that some medical personnel have been injured and killed. They need to respect and protect civilian facilities, providing essential services such as water, sanitation, roads, bridges, or electrical facilities. And then we call, I know you'll hear from Carl as well, on the international community to act with urgency. Funding is critical. In the case of UNICEF, our appeal is for $105 million out of the interagency appeal, and we're 8% funded right now. We need more funding. We need that funding to be free from conditionalities. And we need to keep ports and supply routes open, ensuring that humanitarian assistance reaches those in dire need. And above all, the children and families in Lebanon need peace. Last time I think I spoke here was right after I came back from Gaza, which was about a month ago. I spoke virtually at the time because I was in Jordan. But there are echoes of Gaza that we're seeing in Lebanon now in terms of the attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure. Children are the first affected when there's a conflict like this. And we've seen too many children in Lebanon, Palestine, Israel, and across the region that have already suffered too much. So we used to say we need a ceasefire. We now need ceasefires. Not just a pause in the fighting, because there simply is no way forward that's going to come from conflicts. Time is not on our side here. The 1.2 million displaced, that's like the equivalent scale in the U.S. is 20% of the U.S. being displaced. So can you imagine the scale we're talking about? And if things continue to deteriorate, we may have even more displacement, more deaths. So time is not on our side. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. And I would invite Carl to provide remarks.
Well, thank you. Thanks, and thanks to those of you in the room listening. Really, Ted has said most of it, but maybe just to try to add a bit of flavor also from my perspective. I think that if I start where Ted ended on the echoes from Gaza, I mean, I think, we went to speak to families in shelters across the country, north, south, east, west, and I think the similarities are striking. People at this stage, I was early on in Gaza as well, meeting with families in shelters. They are angry, there is confusion, desperation, fear. These are often public schools. That was mostly the shelters we visited, with a few toilets, as Ted described, but made for children who are now used by hundreds of adults. No showers. People have not showered for 3 weeks. That might be okay the first couple of weeks, but it's not, for sanitation issues, it's not going to be sustainable much longer. And I frankly, coming out of there, think about this every time I take a shower, that these are luxuries for the people in these shelters. People who have left everything, many who have lost everything because they know that their villages or towns have been completely destroyed. And of course, a real sense of desperation. As we were there, though, the fighting escalated, if anything, and so we could see on the roads that the displacement continues. There were overpacked minibuses heading north, and we could hear the bombing. And I think also what Ted said is important, that while the generosity really and solidarity among the people right now is tremendous and should be recognized and applauded, really, you can also sense that tension between groups. The social fabric is really challenged. We met with Christians in predominantly Christian towns who are now worried that they will become a target with the displaced living among them. And we also met with Shia families who feel that they are being discriminated against because of that reason. And so this is really something to watch very carefully given the history. We also met with Syrians on the border. Again, families who were torn, not knowing if this was the right thing to be heading back, given the uncertainties that were waiting on the other side, but frankly felt that they were left with no option. Also, many not sensing that there were anywhere else in Lebanon to flee to. WFP, we were ready for this. We have been looking and preparing for this over the past few weeks and months. So we were able to quickly step up, working hand in hand with other partners like UNICEF and other organizations. We are now delivering daily to some 200,000 people with ready-to-eat food and cash, and we have the capacity to scale up to 1 million people. And what we're now looking at, like Ted was pointing to, is first to identify and begin to find modalities for support to those who are outside the shelters. That's not as easy as those in the shelters, and it might well be that right now the most urgent needs are there, but soon the needs will be everywhere, and we need to now find modalities and identify those vulnerable outside the shelters. And these might be people who have never received any such support in the past and don't really understand how our systems also work. And so this will require some work going forward. The second is to make our support more sustainable. I mean, as I explained, we have been handing out ready-to-eat meals in these shelters. You could tell already that people are tired of this. They want to prepare their own food. It's also an element of dignity and some normalcy to return. And so we're looking at ways of then setting up community kitchens. But again, here, there needs to be an element of also looking to the host communities. Because as soon as we begin to address things more long-term, those tensions might increase. So I think in everything we do going forward, we need to have that aspect of promoting the social cohesion at the same time. That needs to be a cross-cutting in whatever we do. I mean, looking forward, it's similar to what Ted said in terms of asks. We really need access to the south. We need deconfliction system that functions. We have had a couple of convoys, but we estimate that there are still some 40,000 people stuck. They need to be more regularly accessed. So that's something that we're calling for. Also, that ports and other supply lanes remain open. We were ready, as I said, but this will only last for a couple or 3 weeks. Then we need to restock, and we have a couple of ships already at sea, and we need to be able to access that restocking. We also urgently need funding, and funding that is flexible, and so that we, as the situation evolves, can use this for the opportunities that come forward. Ted, I subscribe to everything you said about the need for respect for IHL, and not least, of course, that this needs to come to an end. I mean, what we're describing is really bad. I mean, the situation is desperate. It is really, really bad, but it can also get much, much worse. I think that was a sense that we left with. I spent a couple of days also in Syria before heading back here to Rome, and let me just say that on that side of the border, because I went also to the border to see people coming across the border, that the situation, of course, is also dire in Syria. This was already a crisis. Half the population food insecure, 3 million people, severely food insecure. So in a way, this influx now of what we estimate are some 260 people is really a crisis within a crisis. We have stepped up and supported people as they arrived, together with UNHCR and other partners. I think we have reached some 100,000 people already. But we need to now reconfigure that, because people are quickly moving inland. And mainly, while there are some 20 to 30 shelters that we're also supporting, most people are now going into communities, into homes. And these are families who were already struggling to make ends meet. And so we quickly need to be able to step up and support not only those who are arriving with nothing, but also those families who are receiving these people and who had nothing already to start off with. So there is need here to step up and really work with partners at a different scale in providing for these communities. I think I'll stop there and look forward to questions. And thanks again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Carl. I will go first to Edie. Go ahead.
Thank you both very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. First, 2 quick follow-ups and then a question. Mr. Chaiban, you mentioned lost children. Any idea of how many children are lost? And you both mentioned appeals. You said that UNICEF's is only 8% funded. Can you give us the amount of the appeal, and the same thing for you, Mr. Skau, for the WFP appeal? And my question is, have you presented your findings to the Israeli authorities, and what kind of a response have you gotten? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions. On the number of children that were reunified with their families, let me kind of point to 2 situations. Within Lebanon, there were 9 children that had been separated from family that were reunited with their families. But the process of finding out if there are any more children in that situation goes on daily and is ongoing, essentially. And then the other point I wanted to point out is, as people are crossing the border, and the numbers have gone down, both Carl and I spoke about going to Masna on the border between the main point between Lebanon and Syria. The numbers have gone down in terms of the numbers of people crossing daily. But at the height of it, there were some children who got separated in the process and eventually reunified with the help of the Syrian Arab Red Crescent. What we are doing there at the border is, as the families are crossing, we're putting little bracelets on the children with obviously the agreement of their families, with their names, parent's name, and a phone number where you can reach the parent, so that if they should be separated on the other side, there's a way to quickly identify their immediate relative, the one that's crossed with them. So that gives you a sense of the type of activities that are taking place and the kind of numbers we're talking about. It's not huge, but it's significant. And those 9 their families were found, essentially. On the appeal, let me give you the UNICEF number and then the overall number, and I'm sure Carl will speak to the WFP numbers. The UNICEF appeal is a 3-month appeal for $105 million, and that's the one that's 8% funded. The overall UN appeal, or humanitarian appeal, interagency I should say, because it also includes work by NGOs, that's at above $540 million, roughly speaking. And again, it's for this initial 3-month period, in effect. In terms of your question on with relations to the Israeli authorities, there's a number of channels that we're using to communicate. I mean, we've done a lot more interactions on the whole situation in Gaza. In this case, the discussions are at their are at their farthest when it comes to the whole issue of deconfliction. So both facilitating missions, but also the whole advocacy around protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. And it goes, again, through a number of UN channels to get to those results.
Thank you, Carl. Yeah, I can be very quick. For Lebanon, we have an appeal for $100 million until the end of the year, and that's reaching 1 million people. And on the Syrian side, we have an appeal of $50 million for the next 6 months. I think the overall UN appeal on the Syria side is about $255 million. And I think what's worth noting there is that so far, none of that has been funded. I mean, while the funding is needed to increase for Lebanon, I think, I would like here to just underline for Syria, there has been no money forthcoming so far on that appeal that was set out, I think, by High Commissioner Grandi about a week ago. So I think there is really need to draw attention to the situation in Syria.
And on his reaction from Israel?
Ted.
Well, the same as Ted said, our engagement there has been mainly on the deconfliction, not only in movements and assets in Lebanon, but beyond in the region, and including movements we have now to restock our programs in Lebanon. Yeah.
Michelle, go ahead.
Thank you. Michelle Nichols from Reuters. We've heard both of you have said, echoes of Gaza. We've heard a lot of people say we don't want Lebanon to become the next Gaza. So in terms of aid and aid delivery, what are you trying to maybe do slightly differently or to get ahead of in terms of this conflict?
No, thanks for that question, Michelle. So 2 points. I think firstly is to continue to have access. And I mean, that's where the deconfliction comes in. But it's not just access south of the Litani, it's also access north of the Litani. We need access to Baalbek. We need access to parts of the Bekaa that currently are only accessible with difficulties. Secondly is continue to advocate and raise our voice so that, it's always a tricky balance, but you don't want to say these places should be protected, which implies everything else is not protected. It's the responsibilities of parties to the conflict to differentiate and protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. But certainly to point out that shelters, health centers, hospitals, water points, 27 pumping stations have been damaged, in order to provide water to all these shelters, that they need to be protected. And then thirdly is to really keep pressing so that this doesn't extend. I mean, right now, the population that's on the move, and that's, again, 1 in 5 people in Lebanon's on the move. That's just staggering in terms of numbers. But if the fighting extends to anything north of the Litani, and you've got population on the move from places like Saida, which is a big city in the south, right now, the shelters are full. The public, there are no more, I mean, there's in the very north of the country, yes, but in most of Lebanon right now, there's not that many buildings that can accommodate people that are left, essentially. So, you know, it really is to get ahead of that. And then lastly, as both Carl and I have said, keeping the port open, keeping the airport open. Masna is no longer usable for car traffic. The supplies from Jordan are going all the way north and coming down through Tripoli. That crossing point absolutely has to be sustained. All parties have to, respect the need for access routes such as that one.
Go ahead.
Does Carl want to come in?
Carl, do you want to come in?
No, I don't have much to add. We're looking at all possible scenarios in order to be prepared, while we, of course, advocate that this comes to an end as quickly as possible. As Ted was alluding to, that should the roads, the supply lane from Jordan, Syria cut, the need to remain open with the ports. We are also looking at the possibility of establishing a regular humanitarian air service into Beirut should commercial not be as available as it is now. So we are looking at the different scenarios going forward, and while we advocate strongly to not end up in a situation that is similar to what we now see in Gaza.
And just a quick follow-up, are the lines of communication there when it comes to talking with Israel, Lebanese authorities, Hezbollah?
Carl, do you want to start on that one?
I mean, the special coordinator is leading on that. We don't from HQ point have that contact, but that is those contacts are being done by both UNIFIL, the special coordinator, and I'd imagine also between the resident coordinators on both sides. Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Tony Naddaf, Al Hurra TV. It's a follow. I'm going to start with a follow-up question on Michelle's, actually, because Ted, you mentioned convoys to a remote area in the south, like Marjayoun, like it's deep south here we're talking. How did this communication happen? Like, how were you allowed to reach this far, this deep in the south? That's my first question. And also, maybe if you can clarify, we've been hearing about this lack in funding, and what we're talking about here is different from the appeal that was launched last week to Lebanon. If you can just clarify this point for us, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is indeed the Deep South, and essentially, as Carl just referred to, there's a process of deconfliction. South of the Litani, it gets done with UNIFIL, and so UNIFIL has contacts. OCHA to UNIFIL to the IDF or bodies in Israel that then deal with the IDF, and that deconfliction happens on that side. And then the Lebanese army also has its own dialogue with parties on the ground in Lebanon. And essentially, they then all say, yes, this mission can come at this time on this day to go in to these locations that you mentioned. So that's the process that takes place. North of the Litani, we need to continue to strengthen the process because it's no longer involving UNIFIL. It goes to the special coordinator, but it's the same idea, essentially. And just to be clear, the appeal that we're both referring to is the same one that was launched a week ago. So we're talking about our subcomponent of the overall interagency appeal.
Maggie?
Can I just add on funding, because I think it's important as well, that what we're pointing to is also additional funding. I mean, both UNICEF and WFP and others were having important programs in Lebanon before the crisis. For WFP, assisting Syrian refugees, assisting the national social protection system, working with school meals, for example. I think what is really important that this emergency response is now not drawing from that base if you will, because what we talked about in terms of the importance of now also supporting host communities, the last thing we can do is to pull the rug out of under their feet. We need to be able to continue to support that as part of the pillars, if you will, of society as we scale up on the emergency. There cannot be one or the other. Both is needed in this situation.
Good.
Thank you, Stefano Vaccaro, voce di New York Ital Press. I don't know if you mentioned it, but what is your coordination with UNIFIL? Do they help you? How do they help you if you can? Because we have been hearing that UNIFIL is in position also for that, to try to help and rescue civilians.
Carl, do you want to come in on this one?
Please, Hugo.
Look, I mean, so first on the deconfliction is what we just described, right? Where UNIFIL is the interlocutor in terms of getting the necessary clearance for these different convoys that we were talking about. So that's the channel. And in the UN, as you know, we have something called a designated official. So it's the person who's responsible for security of all operations. And south of the Litani, the designated official is UNIFIL. So they take the lead in terms of doing that. That deconfliction is essential, including for the second part of your question, which is taking people out of different locations where they're at risk. And through the deconfliction process that we just described, there have been exfiltration of civilians that have been taken out when they found themselves caught up in the fighting. It doesn't always have to be the UN. I mean, one of the most prominent cases that I know of involved the Order of Malta and different organizations that were able to get some civilians out. But the deconfliction process was the same, and that was the role that UNIFIL played. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, just a quick follow-up is in a scenario where your people that are trying to rescue or help people get in trouble, crossfire, whatever. Could UNIFIL protect you, come to rescue? I'm trying to try to understand what they are doing now, because somebody said that they should leave because they don't have a function anymore. But maybe you can explain through your work that if UNIFIL wasn't there, your work will be more difficult.
I mean, certainly what I can say is our work would be more difficult. They are the designated official for south of the Litani. They're the ones who are facilitating these missions. So I think that's a direct answer to your question. And it's very clear that UNIFIL needs to be there.
Maggie.
Hello, it's Margaret Bashir from Voice of America. Thanks to both of you for doing this. It's good to see you both. Could you just tell us how many convoys have actually gone, 8 convoys have gone south of the Litani since, I guess, the 1st of October when the ground operations began in South Lebanon? And do you have any estimate of how many civilians are still in those villages? That's my first question. And then, in the last 5 years, Lebanon's been under a terrible economic crisis. People can't withdraw more than a few $100s a month from their bank accounts, even if they have more than that. So I'm just wondering, how is this affecting the resilience of these communities when they're already starting at a negative kind of point? And is the banking crisis and the various restrictions on cash, is that affecting your work and your ability to give cash assistance or to buy food in the local market or whatever supplies you're trying to do locally? Could you just give us an idea? Thank you.
Carl, do you want to start on this one?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if I have the correct information, but I think for WFP there is 2 convoys that we have facilitated as leading also on the logistics cluster to the south. I think the estimates, there is no clear numbers, but the estimates that we heard during the visit was around 30 to 40,000 people. But with 2 convoys, that's not enough, certainly not over time. And so we need to have more assistance and more regular assistance coming in. And there also needs to be a diversity, of course, of assistance. I think on these first convoys there has been food, hygiene kits, and other items, but that certainly needs to be broadened out. I think in terms of cash, we are able to operate on cash still. We are, like Ted said, looking to see how we could do that also to assist those who are now not in shelters but living in temporary housing or among friends and family as part of this next phase. And what we need to do then is to make sure that we don't duplicate and that we with other kinds of benefits and support systems, and that we can make sure that we also identify those most vulnerable in scaling up and rolling out that system. I think what could be worth mentioning though is that while the markets are still relatively functioning as far as we could tell in terms of buying things in grocery stores and so forth, prices are going up quickly. I don't know what the latest number is, but what we heard was that transport has gone up tenfold. And if transport is going up tenfold, well then certainly prices for anything is going to go up quite dramatically soon. We also know, those of us who do the shipping of humanitarian assistance, that shipping insurance have gone up dramatically. So everything that you bring into the country is going to cost significantly more. And so, this is also something that is going to cause a lot of strain going forward. It's going to have an impact on the cost of our operations. As I said, we provide daily meals. They have gone from $2 to $4 over a couple of weeks because of the commodities that our kitchens need to buy go up. But this is, of course, something that first and foremost is going to also put pressure on already vulnerable families.
If I can go back, I think Carl earlier, Maggie, had spoken about, we don't know the number of people still south of Lithuania, but I think the estimate was, Carl, I think we said 40 to 50,000 people that might still be there. And then I thank you for raising the broader issue on the economic crisis. I mean, this does indeed come not only on the heel of the economic crisis, COVID. I mean, it's been a triple whammy for Lebanon. Now, the reality is the economy has largely dollarized, so I mean the exchange rate has stabilized somewhat. And if you bring in fresh dollars, which is what we do, then you can always use those. It's the older dollars what people had in savings account and whatnot that are stuck, as you know. And just to kind of give the equivalent to Carl's point about the pricing, I mean, when we first started responding, and Lebanon's got a very good commercial sector, but we tapped into the local market, and that quickly was tapped out. I mean, there was such a demand for, because people were left with nothing. So anything from blankets to clothing, hygiene materials. So that's what the importance of the route from Jordan is. I mean, as you need to keep that route through Syria open. I'd like to just give one more piece of information to Edie's earlier question about unaccompanied and separated children. So I spoke about 9 children just in the most recent period, but just to give you the figure since October 8th, 2023. So for the last year, over the last year, 67 unaccompanied and separated children at some point were separated from their loved ones, but they've all been reunited with their families, or 65 of the 67 have been reunited with their families. So just gives you a sense of the scale over the year as opposed to the most recent period.
And that's in Lebanon.
That's in Lebanon.
Okay, we have, okay.
If I could just ask one follow-up, Ted, have you guys gotten any guarantees from the IDF or your COGAT, your interlocutors in Israel, that there will not be any strikes on the seaport or the airport, or for instance, like the main road from the Bekaa from Syria, like through Zahle, because in 2006 they bombed that road? Are you getting any guarantees that these vital infrastructure won't be bombed so that you can continue humanitarian and so people can also move with some degree of safety to other areas?
So I think we're all advocating for that and making the case for that, and that continues to be part of the dialogue in effect. And I think we all have seen the reports about about the importance of that infrastructure. So it's a continued discussion, in effect. And it's got to be everyone respecting the neutrality of those sites, in effect, and their vital importance for the operation. Carl, is there anything you want to add on that?
No, I think that covers it. It is our understanding that there has been commitments made that port and the airport will remain open. That's what I can say, but that has not been in the context that we've had. But we understand that those commitments have been made.
Question, so please.
Thank you so much. My name is Ephraim Kosaifi from Arab News Daily. I have two questions for Carl. The first one, you mentioned, or you hinted at the social fabric being really challenged now in Lebanon. You mentioned in Christian-dominated areas, people are worried that they will become a target of airstrikes, which we have seen already in the north. Can you just elaborate just a little bit on that? Like, what kind of discrimination have you seen or heard, and how widespread is this phenomenon? Because what we're seeing here speaks more to what Ted said about solidarity between the community so far. So what makes you really mention that? And when you say we have to pay attention, to whom exactly are you directing your message? That's my first point. The second, any news about domestic workers in Lebanon? We've been hearing horrifying stories that have been left behind, denied entry to shelters. Some of them are being locked inside homes and left. So what are you hearing? Are you trying to reach out to that community as well? Thank you.
Well, let me start, and maybe Ted could also pick up on this question of Syrian. I think first I want to underline how impressed I am by the solidarity, hospitality, and warmth that we've found among the hosting communities. I mean, we spoke to principals in the schools that are now hosting these families, women who had been working, 24/7, basically to try to maintain those. And they spoke also to their friends and families in the community who have been helping to make those shelters run also before we came there, to be able to support with additional food and other commodities. So I think that is number one. It deserves to be recognized, supported, and commended. But what those principals also told us was that in the communities there are these concerns now, and that's beginning to boil. And I think, like Ted said, if we add to that soon children will not be able to go back to school, and maybe there are also other issues around water and sanitation, garbage management, that is going to add a burden on the host communities that will potentially be causing further friction down the road. We also spoke to families, of course, in these shelters that felt that they were in, foreign lands in some way, but that they also spoke that they wanted to be exactly there and in the center of town, because that's where they felt the most safe, even if they didn't feel necessarily at home. I think when I spoke about I meant WFP, humanitarians. I think it should be broader than that, but we need to now make sure that the support that we provide don't fuel any of that tension, but rather contrary, that we take that into account and we help mitigate that by also supporting the host communities. Ted and the colleagues discussed, for example, if it would be possible to maybe provide shelter elsewhere for those families who are in one school, and so that's one school could be providing education to the children in the host communities in a 4-shift, for example, so that children in the host community can begin going back to school. But that's just an example of the kind of programming that we now need to start looking at, so that we really manage and mitigate these potential frictions and tensions going forward, should this drag on. And frankly, it will to some degree drag on, because many of the people that we met, their villages and towns are no longer. And so, there is not a scenario where on Monday they go back for many of these families. There might be other temporary shelters that can be provided, but I think, it is clear now that this will not be possible to return to full normalcy anytime soon, and hence some of these more sustainable elements will need to be built in, and in those we really need to address these potential tensions down the road.
If I can just add, I mean, just winter's coming. I mean, we have to get through winter, and that takes you into the second half of the education year, and the second quarter of next year. And I think we just need to plan, and that's where you need to do the kind of mitigating measures that Carl has just pointed to. I mean, you were also, referring to a kind of a security and safety element, which is another story. But certainly in terms of what we can do, as Carl said, if all the schools are now occupied, but we could free up one of the schools per municipality, for example, and that becomes a school where in 3 or 4 shifts everyone can go to school, then it eases some of the tension about, all of our schools are occupied, where are we going to go, what's happening? So those are the kind of solutions that are under discussion right now. And frankly, the kind of priorities that need to be put on the table on the 24th of October in Paris during the donor conference, where, there needs to be a response to this crisis financially. To go there on the ground, and many of your colleagues from your organizations are actually on the ground, is to see the extent of the humanitarian needs on the ground. They need to be responded to, essentially. In terms of your question on the inclusiveness of the response, this is something that has been emphasized. The government at the highest level has indicated its commitment, but there has been some tensions and some hiccups, and they're being addressed in a real-time basis. So one of the things, for example, that's being suggested for some of the Syrian refugees that may not have found room in the Beirut shelters because of space, and don't want to go, not just Syrians, but among them Syrians who don't want to go to Akkar, for example, in the way north of the country, is to try to find solutions in parts of the Beqaa that are safe. So parts around Zahle, parts around the towns that would be considered more safe than others. And that needs, again, to be a continued focus and a continued attention to be clear. We also heard that in some of the Palestinian camps around Beirut, actually the majority of the population now is not Palestinian. You've got displaced Lebanese who are living there, but also Bangladeshis and others who have taken refuge there. And so it's something that the humanitarian community and the UN in particular is very aware of and is keeping a close eye on with the Lebanese government leadership on this crisis. I mean, the Minister of the Environment, who's overall responsible for coordinating the response, is very open to this dialogue and to this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.